Hello, loyal listeners, if I have loyal listeners. Welcome back to part three of What If Stephen King's Carrie met Andrew, Matt, and Steve from the 2012 found footage movie Chronicle. Now, here in part three is actually where things get good. Hold on. Maybe not at the beginning. I still had to explain how the boys get their powers and also how Carrie discovers her powers, but I promise you things are actually going to start getting interesting because though this chapter may be a little bit longer than my last two, Carrie meets the boys now. And everything else will actually start escalating. So, I actually hope you saw the other two parts. And I'm pretty sure you don't want this intro to last too long. So, by all means, let's get it started.
CH3, you are not alone. At the party at Haven Hills, Andrew was sitting outside wiping beer off his camera that some drunk prick threw at him. I can't believe I let Matt talk me into coming here. I thought it would be better than staying at home and putting up with my dad, but this party is almost as bad as being at home with dad. He thought. Andrew. Andrew. He heard someone call out, but it wasn't Matt. Andrew looked up and saw a black young man in a leather jacket. Matt said you were the only one with a camera. We found the craziest shit and we've gotta get it on tape. It's not. Andrew said. What's up, man? You alright? The young man asked. Yeah, I'm Andrew. I'm Steve Montgomery. I know, I see your posters all over the school. Andrew said. All right. Steve said. Matt and I were just hanging out and we found this cool looking crater thing. Steve said, bewildered. Wait. You're with Matt? Yeah. You think you might want to get it on tape? Steve asked. No, It's not. Come on, you can just get it on tape. It'll be cool. Steve said, trying to convince Andrew. I don't know. Andrew said, unsure. Trust me. Steve said reassuringly. All right. Andrew picked up the camera and began to follow Steve. You know there's tons of girls here, and you're just by yourself, next to a tree. Steve pointed out. I'm just really picky. Is there a light on that? Like on the camera? Steve asked. Yeah. I just need a minute. Andrew first pointed it to the ground, then a bright light turned on and they both continued walking. What are you guys doing out here? Andrew asked. A bunch of people were out here cause we were obsessed with the thing. Steve said. What thing? Andrew asked. You'll see. Steve said with enthusiasm. Oh yeah, I remember you now. Andrew Detmer. I remember you from homeroom. Freshman year. You always had that gray zip-up hoodie. Steve said in realization. You remember that? Yeah. I have a thing for faces, which is why I'm going into politics. Steve said. Garrity. Steve called out. Yeah. Down here. Matt shouted. Where did everybody go? Steve asked loudly. They all left. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. What is that? Andrew asked. I don't see him. Is that the camera? Yeah. I got him. Steve shouted to Matt. Do you guys know how to get back from here? Andrew asked Matt and Steve. But neither of them were paying attention. They both kept talking about a sound that kept coming from the crater. They both laid down to try to hear better, but Andrew just stood next to it and held his camera. Then Steve stood up and said, No, Andrew, you gotta get closer than that. Hey. Don't. Push me, just don't push me. We're not gonna push you, just check this out, just listen. Andrew took a few steps closer. For a moment it was quiet, then a loud high-pitched ringing made Matt and Steve jump back. Holy shit. Matt said. How creepy is that? Steve said almost excitedly. Hey Andrew, can you hear it too? I don't know, I mean probably is pretty loud, Andrew said to Matt. Hello. Matt yelled down the crater. I'm going down there, Steve said. No, I'm going back. Andrew said. Come on you guys, let's just go back. Then before either of them knew it, Steve jumped in. Shit. He's a ninja. Matt said. Wait Matt, what are you doing? Andrew asked as Matt carefully slid down and asked Andrew for a little more light. Matt, don't be an idiot. Andrew said. Then Matt went all the way in, practically disappearing in the dark crater. Come on Matt, you're my ride home. I can't believe I'm doing this. Andrew whispered to himself. He slowly and carefully walked in. Aw, it smells awful down here. He whispered to himself again. Aw. He noticed he stepped in something wet. But he eventually caught up to Matt, who eventually caught up to Steve. Then 2 minutes later they were standing in awe at a wall that of, what appeared to be, a bunch of glowing crystal rocks. The high piercing sound was definitely louder. Matt and Steve had to cover their ears. I'm freaking out right now. Andrew said fearfully. Guys, can we get out of here? Please. Andrew said anxiously. Andrew. Is it showing up on camera? Matt asked. I don't know, it's messing with it or something, I don't really wanna film it. Andrew answered. Don't worry, I'll buy you a new one. Matt said, trying to talk over the high-pierced ringing. Wow, Matt, look at this. Andrew said as Steve was touching a crystal that appeared to have moving roots. This is awesome, Steve chuckled. Then the crystal turned into a dark red and everybody's nose started bleeding. Andrew's camera kept glitching in and out. Matt, Steve. Steve. Andrew called out before everything went black. Matt, turn your phone off, Steve, you too. We have to document this. Andrew said with enthusiasm. You guys ready? Yeah, Steve said. Steve, can you please move to your left? Steve took 4 steps to his left and asked Andrew if where he stood was good. Andrew nodded and asked Matt to stand right in front of Steve. Alright guys, this is the ball test. Then Steve threw the ball but it hit Matt's face. Aw. Matt said. Damn it, Steve. I said underhand. Matt said angrily. I tried. Steve said with a laugh. Then when it was Matt's turn, Matt threw the ball toward the ground but curved up and hit Steve in the face. And the crowd goes wild. Matt said loudly as Andrew erupted with laughter. Then it was Andrew's turn. Matt beamed him in the face. Steve whispered to Matt. I will. Matt whispered back. Matt threw it as hard as he could, but to everyone's surprise, it stopped short from Andrew's face and floating 8 inches away from him. Aw! Andrew shouted in excitement. Oh my god. Oh my god. That is crazy. Matt and Steve said. Oh, dude, you're bleeding. "You're bleeding," Matt said. Andrew wiped some blood away from his nose. "You did it?" Matt said excitedly as he ruffled Andrew's hair in celebration. "At school." "Telekinesis," Steve said. "Yes, do tell." Matt said. "The ability to move, lift, vibrate, that's my favorite, spin, bend, break, or impact objects through the direct influence of mental power or other non-physical means." "Sounds familiar?" Andrew asked. "Very familiar," Steve said back. "You wanna see direct influence?" Matt asked. Then he told Andrew to point the camera at three girls. A leaf blower floated over, turned itself on, and blew up one of the girls' skirts. "Ha! Ha! Ha! She's wearing black today," Steve said humorously. "That's direct influence," Matt said proudly. Later with Carrie. As Carrie was sadly walking down the hallway, she heard some people whisper about what happened in the girls' locker room last week. She tried not to let it bother her, but she saw that someone spray painted on some lockers "Carrie White eats shit." She then started walking at a faster pace to the girls' bathroom. She took her book bag off her shoulder as she felt tears coming. As she stares at her reflection, she unbraided her hair and she felt a tear fall from her right eye. Her thoughts went dark as she stared intensely at the mirror. The idea of glass raining down on Chris Hargensen and her being stabbed by some of the shards and some stuck in her face, Tina being burned alive and screaming in pain, Nikki and Lizzie having rats devouring them and crawling all over them both as they cry out in pain and misery. Then cracks started developing on the mirror, then the bottom half shattered and some of the pieces fell into the sink. Carrie was in shock at first, but as she stared at the mirror shards and they started floating, her eyes widened, her heart started racing in excitement, and she started smiling when she realized she was doing it. Then a girl walked in and the pieces fell back in the sink. She quickly and awkwardly picked up her book bag and walked out. Carrie went to the library to check out a bunch of books, some about telekinesis, and some about menstruation. She also looked up magical powers on the computer there and saw a hand move a piece of paper without touching it. Even in her English class, she was looking at a flagpole. She stared at it and tilted her head, then the flag billowed by itself. Carrie grinned a little. Andrew was looking at his camera and the footage he took throughout the week. He laughed at a shot of Matt getting hit in the nuts by the baseball they were practicing with. Then he looked up and caught sight of the flag billowing, but Andrew noticed that the wind wasn't blowing. "That's weird," Andrew thought. At first, Andrew thought maybe it was Matt or Steve messing with the flagpole. But Andrew then glanced at Carrie, who seems to have been staring at the flagpole as well, and as Andrew looked at the flagpole and back at Carrie several times, he couldn't help but wonder if she was the one that was making the flag move. But before he could think any further, the teacher called Carrie. "Favorite poem? Did you bring one?" Carrie nodded. "Then why don't you come up to the class and share it with all of us?" Andrew noticed the teacher smiling flirtatiously at a girl near the front. Carrie knows her as Tina. When Carrie finished her poem, the whole classroom was silent for a moment. "Well, that was very disturbing. That's the most you've said in class all year." Andrew scowled at the teacher as everyone else laughed. "Anything else you'd like to share, or are you done scaring us for the day?" "Asshole," Andrew mumbled. "Excuse me, Mr. Detmer? Did you say something?" "I said awesome. I think what Carrie read was awesome. Didn't you, Mr. Ellman?" For a moment he looked down in silence, then immediately asked for one of the twins, Lizzie, to read something, trying to dodge Andrew's question. Carrie quickly went back to her seat and looked over to Andrew. He was looking back and smiled at Carrie, making her blush. Later during lunch. At lunch break, Carrie tries to look for a place where she wouldn't be disturbed. Though no one ever tries to talk to her in the cafeteria, it's a little too noisy for her when she tries to read her books, so she found an almost empty spot on the bleachers. She saw only 3 boys talking to each other, and it was a warm, clear, and sunny day. They didn't seem to notice her as she sat down and pulled out a library book from her book bag. With Andrew, Matt, and Steve. Andrew was setting up his camera as Matt explained, "This week in my room I discovered that I've gotten stronger. Last night I was able to get my whole bed off the ground and no nosebleed. I've been lifting weights too." Steve said, "Guys, my theory is that it's like a muscle or like elastic, if you stretch it too far too quick it'll tear." Matt said, "I think that's why we can lift heavier things now, 'cause we're working it out, getting buff." Matt finished. Steve chuckled and picked up a can of Pringles. "How's this for a workout?" Steve asked as he levitated some into his mouth. Matt and Andrew chuckled. Then Andrew lifted his eyes and caught sight of a strawberry blonde girl at the bottom of the bleachers who appeared to be reading a book. "I'm sure that's the same girl from last week. There aren't any other strawberry blonde girls in this school." He thought to himself. "Hey guys, I'll be back in a bit," he said to Matt and Steve. "Wait, where are you going?" Matt asked, but Andrew didn't answer. "With Carrie." As Carrie was reading, she was also enjoying the relative amount of quiet around her. "I may not have anyone to talk to, but at least I have some time to myself and not worry about anyone disturbing me. I can barely hear the three at the top of the bleachers," she thought to herself as she was reading. Hello," Andrew said, not knowing what else to say. Carrie quickly looked up to see the boy from last week that tried to talk to her. "Hi," Carrie said in a low voice. Due to the fact that neither of them had no idea what to say to each other, there was silence. I hope you've been doing better since last week," Andrew said, trying to start a conversation. "Yeah," Carrie simply said. Carrie has next to no experience talking to anybody other than her mother, so she would not know how to start a conversation. Not knowing what else to talk about, Andrew looked around and noticed some books peeking out of Carrie's book bag. One was about menstruation and one was about telekinesis. "Wait, you read about telekinesis too?" Andrew asked. Then Carrie closed her book, quickly put it back in her bag with the rest of the books, and tried to walk away. "Wait. I didn't mean to try and scare you or offend you. It's just my cousin and his friend were also looking up telekinesis on one of their phones," Andrew said to Carrie. Have you ever wondered if it were real? Telekinesis, I mean," Andrew asked sincerely. Carrie gave a small grin and nodded. Andrew smiled back. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you could meet someone like that?" he asked. Carrie looked down, smiled, and said, "I don't know, I guess I would have to meet them first." "Wait," Andrew said before she walked away. "I can show you that it exists." He took 3 steps back, then held out a hand to Carrie's book bag. She also took a few steps back for fear that it might be a trick. But her book bag started to float off of her shoulder. It opened itself up and all of the books started floating around it. Then one by one they all went back in the book bag and slowly floated back to Carrie. Andrew smiled for a moment, but his smile started to fade as he thought of the other things that could happen. He could have scared her away and never see her again, or she could run away screaming and tell everyone she'd run into. But to Andrew's surprise, she smiled and said, "I thought I was the only one." "Huh?" Andrew said curiously. Then it was Andrew's turn to look confused and surprised. Carrie opened up her book bag and 2 books floated out. They both opened up, and the pages quickly flipped back and forth. Andrew looked behind them to see if Matt or Steve wasn't playing some sort of trick on him, but he didn't see anyone. He only saw Carrie staring intensely at the books that were floating. They both closed and floated back into Carrie's book bag. "Holy shit. I never thought there was anyone at school that was like us," he thought as his heart was racing. "You've gotta come with me," Andrew said with excitement. "Please. There are 2 other guys that are just like us?" "You mean you know more people who are like you and me?" Carrie asked. "Yeah. They won't believe this. Please. Come with me, I can take you to them right now." Andrew said as he held out his hand to her. Though she hesitated at first, she thought about it for a moment, then she gave Andrew a curious but hardened look and took his hand. With Matt and Steve. Hey Matt. Yeah. Do you think Andrew has a chance with that girl he went to talk to? Steve asked. I don't know, I don't keep up with him or anything. Either you don't know or you don't care, man. Steve said. What? Matt asked almost angrily. I'm just saying, he's your cousin, he's family, at least try to talk to him. Steve said. I talk to him every time I drive him to school. Like what? I tell him about my philosophy lessons. Yeah, but that's just stuff that you want to talk about, and some of that philosophy shit you talk about isn't something you should try and teach people. What are you saying? That I'm not good to Andrew? 'Cause I invited him to the party. Matt says firmly. Yeah, I get that, but do you try to spend time with him? I told you I try to talk to him every time I... No. That's not what I'm asking. Do you try to spend time with him because you want to? Not just out of obligation. Matt said nothing. You should try and take some time out to talk to him, he's a good guy. They both looked down the bleachers to see Andrew running up with Carrie in hand. Damn. Steve thought. Oh my god. Matt thought. Guys, you won't believe this, but she's just like us. Andrew said with excitement. What do you mean? Matt asked. I mean she has telekinesis too, she can move things with her mind just like us. Matt and Steve raised their eyebrows in surprise. Really? Matt asked. Andrew nodded excitedly. Then show us. Steve said. Carrie looked around and saw a can of Pringles next to Steve. She deeply exhaled, then stared intently at the can. Not only was it floating towards her, but some chips also floated out and into Carrie's mouth as the can floated into Carrie's hands. Damn. Steve said. Holy shit. Matt said in a low voice. Sorry, but we never thought we'd ever find anyone other than us. Andrew turned around and looked at Carrie with a big smile. Carrie looked down, smiled, and blushed timidly. Were you at the party at Haven Hills last week? Matt asked. Carrie shook her head. I don't really go to parties, she said in a low voice. Then how did you get your... Then Andrew cut Matt off and said. I know we all have some questions for her, but I thought that maybe we should take this out of the backyard, especially now that we've found someone new. At an unknown store. Wait, stop right here, this is perfect. Steve said almost mischievously. Carrie raised her eyebrows in surprise and curiosity. This is where they go to practice their powers? Carrie asked herself. I didn't know you guys come here to practice your powers. Carrie said to Andrew. We don't, we normally practice at Matt's house. Andrew said. Back at school I merely suggested that we branch out and take it out of Matt's backyard, especially now that we found someone else that's just like us. So, what now? Matt asked. I don't know. Steve said, looking around. Andrew is looking around as well, then his gaze stopped at a woman's shopping cart. Guys, I've just got an idea. Andrew said to Matt and Steve. He gave the camera to Matt, whispered something to Steve and told him where to stand, and got a red plastic lightsaber. Andrew pointed it at the woman's shopping cart. Is the camera on? Are you getting this? Andrew asked. Yeah. Matt said in a low voice. Then the woman's cart started moving on its own and rolling away from her. Hey! Somebody grab that! She shouted. As the cart turned Steve's way, Steve walked by as some stuffed animals flew off the shelf and into her cart as it turned left. Hey guys! Carrie said. I'd like to try something. They followed her to the toy aisle where all the stuffed animals were. A little girl in pink picked up a stuffed giraffe. Carrie wiggled her index finger to make the giraffe's leg wag back and forth. At first, the little girl gasped and dropped it. She slowly walked towards it and touched it with her foot a few times. "Did it just?" the little girl whispered. Carrie wiggled her finger again, making the giraffe nod. The three boys laughed and Carrie just smiled. "Will, you hurt me?" the little girl asked. Carrie wagged her finger to make the giraffe shake its head no. The little girl reluctantly picked up the giraffe. "Can you talk?" the little girl asked. Carrie made the giraffe shake its head no again. The little girl smiled. "Do you want to come home with me?" the little girl asked. Carrie thought about it for a second, then she wagged its tail. The little girl narrowed her eyes in curiosity. But she shrugged her shoulders and assumed that meant yes, so the little girl hugged the giraffe. "You're coming home with me?" the little girl whispered. Carrie smiled. Then Andrew smiled and looked at Carrie. That was kind of nice of her. Andrew thought. "Right there, that bear on the top shelf." Matt whispered. "I got the legs." Steve whispered. "What are you?" Andrew said. But before Carrie and Andrew knew it, a stuffed bear was floating just above the little girl. Steve growled loudly. The bear dropped down to the little girl and started rapidly shaking its arm at her. The little girl ran screaming. "What are you looking at, little girl? Stay in school," Steve said with a loud deep voice. Matt and Steve were laughing. "Come on, guys," Andrew said. While Carrie tried to follow the little girl, Matt, Steve, and Andrew walked around to the front of the store until Matt saw a man chewing gum, then whispered to Andrew. "Hey Andrew, is your camera on?" Andrew nodded. "See the guy chewing the gum? Well, Matt grabs a plastic blue claw nearby. While he's chewing the gum, I'm going to pull it right out of his mouth," Matt whispered. While the man was chewing his gum, his head jerked back quickly. The man looked around confused, then all of a sudden he was pushed over into a stocking rack and Matt quickly ran away. "Wait, why are we running?" Steve asked. "We don't need to run." At a diner, near the store, all four of them walked in looking for a table. "That one there looks good," Andrew said, pointing at the booth next to the entrance. All four of them sat and giggled quietly. Matt, Steve, and Andrew were giggling, but Carrie was smiling to herself and thought about that little girl. "I thought you were going to pull the gum out of his mouth?" Andrew asked. "I tried," Matt said. "Wait, I'm sure this will work," Andrew said as he got a fork. Andrew turned on his camera, then gave it to Steve. "Come on, man. Just trust me," Andrew said. "I don't want to do it," Matt said. "Come on, don't be a bitch about it, just do it," Steve said. "Just put your hand on the table." "Alright, just give me a countdown," Matt said. "I will, I promise." Then Andrew quickly stabbed Matt's hand with the fork, causing Matt to jump back with a small yelp. Carrie flinched too. But Andrew showed Steve the bent fork, laughing. "Like I said," Andrew kept saying. "Whoa," Matt said as he showed that his hand didn't even have a mark on it. "Just pretend there's a barrier over your hand, and as long as you're ready nothing will hurt you because of the barrier," Andrew explained. "That's so sick," Matt said, impressed. "Hey Steve, Steve, Steve. You've got to try this, give me your hand," Matt said. No, I'm good," Steve kept saying. Steve pretended to press an earpiece in his ear and said to Andrew, "Boys, please tell us what's going on here?" Well, it would appear that a Virgin Mary has appeared in the syrup of a local man's pancake," Andrew said. "No, it hasn't," Matt said. "Well, it will in a second." Andrew stared in the middle of the bowl, then it started taking shape. "Oh, that is definitely some supernatural shit," Steve said. Carrie looked curious. Andrew called over a waitress, pointed to the weird shape he made, then when she looked she gasped and ran away in fright. Steve made a triangular-shaped piece of paper, but when Steve flicked it between the two cups Steve said, "Aw, too much pressure. Looks like you made it to me." Carrie thought. Then Matt tapped Andrew's shoulder. "Hey Andrew, is your camera on?" "Of course." Andrew said. "Oh come on man, leave her alone," Andrew said to Matt. Then the waitress's cart started moving away as she was about to put some dishes on top of it, but she just dropped them on the floor shattering them. Matt and Steve were laughing silently. "Come on man, that's so messed up," Andrew whispered. "You're going to get her fired," Steve said quietly to Matt. They all eventually finished eating and left tips. They all went outside in a parking lot where they all talked further, though Carrie looked up at the dark clouds and was getting worried. "Hey guys, don't you think we should go back inside? It looks like it's about to rain," Carrie said a little worried. "Don't worry about it, Carrie," Matt said. "Oh, Steve, what position did you play on the team again?" Matt asked. "Running back," Steve answered. "I bet that's how you met your girlfriend," Matt said. "Actually, yeah," Steve said. "Do you guys share cups?" Matt asked. "No, we don't share cups," Steve said angrily. "See that car though? That red one?" Matt asked. "Yeah. The gum was cool, you tried, but it was a failed attempt." "Hey Andrew, is your camera on?" "Yeah," he answered. "Good, 'cause you're gonna want to see this." Steve stared intensely at the car, then as he moved his body to the left, the car started moving out of its parking spot and into another behind it. "Gur, that's what I'm talking about, Gur, Steve Montgomery for president, Gur," Steve yelled into the camera. Carrie noticed that the car was not directly in the parking spot, so she used two fingers to scoot the car perfectly into the parking spot. "My nose is bleeding and it's pretty bad," Steve said before Carrie turned around. "Steve, are you alright?" Carrie asked concerned. "Yeah, I'm alright, it happens." "Hey man, do you want me to go back in the diner and get you some napkins?" Matt asked. "Oh don't worry about it, I already grabbed some before we got out here." A few minutes later, Matt and Steve were talking and laughing at each other's jokes. Andrew looked over at a smiling Carrie and asked, "So, do you like us?" he asked nervously. Carrie nodded. "Well, there were some uncomfortable topics, but it's better than having no friends at all." Andrew looked down in thought, then looked back to Carrie. "I know what you mean. Sorry if I scared you with the fort thing." "It's okay," she said. "I understand why you're quiet," Andrew said, trying to break the awkward silence between him and Carrie. "I haven't had friends in a long time either, it's kind of nice, right?" Andrew asked. "Yeah," Carrie said with a smile. Andrew smiled back. Then Andrew glanced over to see the woman from the red car. "Hey guys, here she comes, here she comes." They were all snickering as she was looking around. "I could have sworn I parked it right here," Steve said with a quiet high-pitched voice. Then she looked over to the four teenagers. "Ignore us," Steve said loudly to the woman. "We're just Mormons." Then all of them, including Carrie, burst out laughing, especially Matt, who is laughing the hardest. "Oh, Garrity's got the giggles," Andrew said while laughing. Then Andrew felt a drop fall on the back of his hand, then he felt it on the back of his neck, then Carrie felt something wet on her shoulder that made her look up. "Guys, I think it's starting to rain," Andrew said. "Come on guys, let's get back to the car," Matt said. "Ah!" Steve shouted while he was banging on the dashboard in excitement. "Calm down man, just take it easy with the merchandise," Matt said to Steve. But still, how did no one see that? It was out in the open. Her face. I cannot get her face out of my mind. Andrew said amusingly. That was awesome. It just gives me so many ideas about stuff that we can do. Steve said excitedly. Then there was constant honking coming from behind them. Oh, come on. Matt said in annoyance. Just go around me. Hey Steve, take the camera. Andrew said. Just make sure it's zoomed all the way out. Andrew said. It is. Okay then, what are you going to do? Steve asked. Don't worry, Matt. We want him to stop honking, he needs to get to where he wants to go faster. I have an idea that can be a win-win for all of us. Andrew said. Andrew stared at the truck. Then lifted both his hands. The truck seems to have lifted off the ground a bit and moving on its own uncontrollably with the slight screeching sounds it was making. Hey, Andrew, what are you doing? Steve asked. I'm just moving this truck in front of. Then Andrew sneezed and the truck went straight through the guardrail and tumbled into the woods. Carrie jumped in shock and fear. Andrew, shit. Matt shouted. What the hell did you just do? Steve asked loudly. Oh my god. Andrew said fearfully, realizing what he'd done. Stop the car, Matt. Stop the car. Steve kept shouting hysterically. Hold on guys, I can get us down there. Matt said. Guys, I'm sorry. Then about a minute later they made it all the way down to the truck where it was in a lake. Why did you do that, Andrew? Matt asked. I didn't mean to. Andrew said. Shit. What the hell is wrong with you? Look at this. Matt shouted. Will you just calm down? The guy's probably still in there. Matt shouted through the heavy rain. I'm sorry, okay. Andrew shouted. Then Carrie stepped forward. Don't worry guys, I can help, I can get him out. Carrie lifted her arms. Carrie, wait, stop. Matt began, but then he and the other two noticed that the rain was frozen in place and it was raining everywhere else but around them, as if they were in a protective bubble shielding them from the rain. Then Carrie used one arm to lift the truck out of the lake, and the other to pull the car door off, and the unconscious man slowly floated out and into Steve's arms. All three boys were staring in shock and awe. Then Matt took out his cell phone. Matt called the police and told them where they were, what bridge they were at, and as soon as they show up he'll flag them down and show them where the accident is. Hey Carrie? Matt asked. Will you put the truck back in the river? Huh. It's just, we have to make it look like we saved him from the wreck, not the truck. Matt said. Think about it, how can we explain that a bunch of teenagers pulled a whole truck out of a lake? Yeah, I see. Andrew said in understanding. Yeah. Steve simply said. All right. Carrie said as she lifted her arms again and put the truck back in the lake. That's about right, right? She asked Matt. Yeah. I've got to go back to the highway. I said to them that I would flag them down as soon as they get here. But Andrew, we're going to have to talk afterward. Sometime later. Do you think this is some kind of game? Matt asked. Look, I understand why you guys are angry and everything, but considering it was an accident I thought you'd be at least a little more understanding. Andrew said. Andrew. You put someone in the hospital tonight? Andrew, look at me, you put a guy in the hospital, how do you feel about that? Accident or not, you hurt somebody? Matt said a little louder. Matt walked away feeling both scared and stressed. Steve was frantically pacing from both the cold and the situation, and Carrie was sitting in the car feeling scared and cold, rubbing her hands on her arms. We need rules, okay? Matt declared. Rule number 1, no using it on living things. Rule number 2, you can't use it when you're angry. Rule number 3, I don't think that we should be using it in public or telling anyone about it. You can't just declare rules. Andrew said. I will declare rules, especially when you do something like this. You're the one that said nothing matters. Andrew said. Look. I will declare rules. If we're going to keep going and keep getting stronger, we need rules. We need rules, right? Matt asked, looking to Steve. Yeah, Matt's right, we need rules. Right, Carrie. Carrie looked down, then nodded, still rubbing her arms. Matt placed a hand on Steve's shoulder and whispered that he needed to talk to him. Okay. Steve whispered back. They both went a little ways away. I think we should keep an eye on Carrie. Matt said. What do you mean? She just saved a man's life tonight. Steve said. I know, but she lifted that car by herself and even tore the door off, and she didn't even look tired afterward, no nosebleed or anything. I think she could be stronger than all three of us put together, so if she just decided to ignore the rules and just did whatever she wanted, I'm not sure if any of us would be able to stop her, even if all three of us worked as a team to fight her. Matt said. I see, now that I think about it, I understand now. But what about Andrew? You saw what he did. Steve said. Good point, Andrew's my cousin, I'll keep an eye on him, you keep an eye on Carrie. At the same time, Andrew reached over to his camera and turned it off, then crouched down to Carrie. I swear, I didn't mean to hurt that guy. All I wanted to do was just move him in front of us so that he would stop honking at us. I didn't mean for that to happen. Andrew said. Carrie said nothing but scratched her nose and uneasily shifted where she was sitting. Andrew looks down, feeling sad and scared that he may have scared Carrie. I really am sorry. Andrew said sincerely. Carrie said nothing. She just felt cold and scared. At first, all she wanted to do was go home, but she looked up and realized that the sun was almost down. Then she started to shiver when she thought about what her mother would do to her and how long she would spend in the closet for coming home so late. Then she looked even more scared than she did before. Andrew noticed, and felt worse. Andrew walked around to enter the back seat on the other side of Carrie.
And that's the end of part 3. And I hope you have enjoyed part 3, because I'm also planning on making a part 4. I would also like to extend some apologies. Apology 1 would be the fact that this came out so late. To be honest, I'm editing this myself, so yeah, considering the fact that I'm doing this on my own, I honestly have to put a lot of work into this. That, and I'm also working on some other chapters that I have not truly made yet. Because chapter 6, I'm actually still working on that. And apology 2 is the fact that there were some mispronunciations. Because I'm pretty sure there have been some weird things and mumblings that don't really make sense in this. Probably because my spelling is not necessarily perfect. And hey, I never said I was a perfect person. All I'm hoping for is that you guys actually enjoy this. And I'm also giving a shout out to Crazy Amanda for, to be honest, being the only person who seems to have made a comment. While there is another person, I did not remember his name, but I'm glad to see that he at least found it interesting. And I'd also like to give a thanks to people actually leaving some likes, despite the fact that they didn't leave any comments. Shows that there's at least some people out there that like what I'm doing. Not that I would necessarily care considering I have plans on releasing parts 4 and 5. Unfortunately, I'm still working on 6. But still, I'm glad that you guys are still enjoying this, and I also would like to, um, hope that you guys, subscribe for more videos because I don't just have what ifs on this channel. I've also had some other videos that I've made in the past, and hopefully you'll also hit the bell notification to be notified of my latest what if chapters, or if I just make another random video like in the past. And I will see you guys for part 4, and hopefully that one won't be as long as this one because considering how long it is, I honestly had to put a lot of effort into it, and it probably has taken a little bit longer than it should have, and I apologize for that. And, like I said, I'll see you in part 4.